All right, so what is it to be a prodigal? In my case, a prodigal pastor. Prodigal is just a generic term, can have anything attached to it. You might be a prodigal son yourself or daughter, a prodigal husband, a prodigal wife, prodigal father or mother, a prodigal daughter, like I said. To be a prodigal can express itself in many, many different forms or places or expressions of life. And a prodigal is simply one who squanders. It comes from a French word, and originally from the Latin, but from the French, to squander, to be a spendthrift, to waste, to take what you have and waste it. You know, a gambler would be a good example of a prodigal, wasting his or her money. Until in the story in Luke of the prodigal son, until he has nothing. And then he realizes he has nothing, and for many it's too late. The beauty of the story of Luke is that it wasn't too late for this prodigal. After some years of leaving his father's house where he had everything, he ends up in a pigsty with nothing, trying to make a few bucks feeding pigs and realizing that he's starting to eat what the pigs eat because it's all he's got. And he finally says in the vernacular, he says, "What in the hell am I doing? I had everything, and I wasted it." And mostly the old come to that point. I did when I got older. But man, to come to that point when you're 20s or 30s and you still have your whole life ahead of you, it's probably better. I'm thrilled that I came to it as a 60-year-old, roughly. 55 to 0, about a 62 or 3-year-old, right? And I realized that I was in the prodigal situation. I'd squandered and wasted everything. Where did I squander and waste everything? I squandered and wasted everything in the public church. The church we find in every American city, every American town. The church that is supposed to, by its own definitions, represents God. God is here. You know, the church is the end of your search for a friendly church. Friendship is here. God is here. Your answer is here. And I, being the pastor of the church, gave everything I had. I took all of my inner resources, my outer resources, the longing that I had to find reality and truth and God, and I took it to the church and gave it all and threw it all away on things that had nothing to do with God. Buildings, furniture, salaries, administration fees, mortgages, supplies. I mean, you name it. Everything but God. I'm just going to tell you something very important. If you're a churched Christian and feeling like I need to go to church more, I need to be at church more, let me just say this to you. God is not waiting for you to go to church more. And God is not even waiting for you at church. And the pastors and leaders there are not waiting for you because they represent God. They're waiting for you because they need you to be there to pay the bills. Now, I don't mean to be as cynical as I sound, but I was one, and I had oversight over lots of pastors over a 10 or 15 year period of the 35 plus years I was a pastor. And church is miserable behind the scenes. It's no fun. Whiskey's running around here with his bells on. Whiskey has bear bells. They're designed to let bears know, because there are black bears around here, to let bears know that we're here, we're coming. And Whiskey, he would protect me. He's quite the predator in his own right. He thinks he is anyways. He's a wonderful friend, wonderful guy. Best dog in the world, in my opinion. But anyways, behind the scenes, church leaders are pretty much miserable. They need people to come. They need money to be raised. They're trying to get the money to build the latest vision. And it's not really about God too much. And yet Christians think that if you don't go to church, you're missing God. You're not being right with God. I mean, you know, if you're a church Christian, you know what I'm saying is true. That we've been so conditioned and so propagandized that not to go to church is it's tantamount to leaving God, to falling away. But I want to say to you that I had to leave church. I was the prodigal, wasting my time in church. And the only way I could redeem the time, the only way I could redeem the lost years of the locust, was to leave and go back to the Father's house. And the Father's house is not your local church. Even Jesus said that. He said, you won't worship, he said, on mountaintops or in temples, buildings. True worshipers will worship me in spirit and in truth. It has nothing to do with anything external at all. And by the way, as I sit here in the beautiful Sitgreaves National Forest, God isn't here either, any more than he is anywhere else. What's different about here is that here nobody's taking my money, and here it's quiet. It's peaceful. It's a rest to the mind and the soul. Church is like top 40 radio. You know, the hits just keep on coming. You got to have a special music, and you got to have an offering song, and you got to have a sermon, and you got to have prayer time, and you got to have hymns or spiritual songs in case of what kind of church you're in. It's top 40 radio. Because you got to keep the thing going. You got to keep the draw going. And if it's a big church like a mega church, then you're going to have all kinds of stuff. You're going to have flat screen TV, giant TVs, and celebrity guests, and movies, and kids are going to have their own, all their own electronics, and but all of it's about entertaining people, holding people. Now, if it's a little church, a little old-fashioned church, the hold is going to be more by guilt than by show. You should be here. You need to be committed. Remember the first church I ever went to, thinking I'm going to find God here. The first thing that was told me, this is the truth. I'm not making this up. The very first thing I was told in the church that I first started, my wife Susan and I first started going to, was we can't be members. You can't be members here, the pastor said, unless you tithe. Our members tithe. What is tithing? It's giving, and in this case, he was very specific, 10% of your gross income. Not after taxes, but gross income. You see, that's very spiritual, because after taxes, and this was said too, this was the argument, if you do it after taxes, then it means you're willing to give the state more than you give God. You're putting the state before God, and we don't want that. So, tithing is of gross income. It wasn't you can be a member here if you're hungry for God. It wasn't you can be a member here no matter what you are or what you've done. We want you. This is a place of healing. God's here. It wasn't even that. They weren't even professing that God was there. What they were saying is, you want to be a member? You got to tithe. And then the other things. You got to believe our statement of faith. You got to be loyal and devoted to the pastor. None of which, zero of which, is in the New Testament. There are no pastors in the New Testament. There is no tithing in the New Testament. There is no Sunday meeting in a local church with a residential pastor in the New Testament. Virtually nothing of the New Testament church today, calling itself New Testament, is New Testament. Now, if you love your church and you want to go to church and all that, go. I'm not telling you don't go to church if you want to. I know people love their church. They love the pastor. They love his teaching. He's so funny. He's so informed. He teaches the Bible. Nothing but the Bible. That's a whole other story, another scam, but we'll get to that one another time. So if you want to go. But just realize something. Going to church on Sunday, the church that we know about, the kinds of churches we go to, has nothing to do with the Bible at all. And yet, if you were to leave, and I've encountered this, because I've not been in church at all for 10 years. And I run in occasionally to people that I used to be in church with. They have no idea who I am or what I've done. They didn't know who I was then either. You don't get to know anybody in church, by the way. Especially if you're the pastor, you get to know nobody because your whole shtick is phony. But the first thing they learned in talking to me, and I'd just be open, no, I'm not going to church. Nah. Oh, boy, the hurt, worried, startled expressions that I'd see on their faces. Because we've been so conditioned. The church has done such a good job over the centuries of teaching us that church and God are synonymous. They are one and the same. That if you're a churchgoer, you know this without me telling you. If you were to stop going to church, first thing you'd suffer is your own guilty conscience, because your conscience has been given to you by outside forces. You think that God's pleased as long as you go to church. That's BS. It's a lie. God isn't pleased if you go to church. God doesn't care if you go to church. God isn't even there. God doesn't inhabit buildings. The only place of habitation for God is in people. And some are aware of it and some are not. And so again, God is not waiting for you on Sunday morning to show up. He doesn't care. Don't show up. The only people that care are the ones who are invested in the process. And also those who have been so conditioned that they think you're missing God if you're not at church. And every church needs those people, because those people are what keep the rest of the people in church on Sundays. So I was a prodigal. I left. I already knew God. But I was seduced. I admit that in my own greed, my own weakness. I was seduced into thinking there was a better way to find God, to know God, to be in God, and that was to go to the church that somebody took me to. And the church was so competent in drawing my wife and me in that we ended up staying for almost 40 years, 35, 38 years in 6 or 8 of them in the first church that we weren't the pastors of, and then 35 plus years in churches that we did pastor. And so we became propagators of the same scam. And all those years, that devotion to the process, to the system, to the religious structure, wiped out in me any ability, any room in my head to actually seek God peacefully and freely, because everything was about supporting the church. And so I have to say the last 10 years, the latter rain is greater than the former rain. The last 10 years, here comes that doggy. The last 10 years have been the best years of our lives, best years of our marriage, the best years of our spiritual lives, the best years of our relationship with God. Never any better. But we had to wake up. And I woke up because over the last 5 or 6 years that I was there, I realized this is nonsense. And not only is it nonsense, it's corrosive. It's debilitating. I'm squandering my life here. And so is everybody else that's here. It wasn't only selfish. My opinion was, and my revelation was, that everybody's squandering themselves here. And so it's interesting what happened. I decided to start saying that. I thought, I can condition the church somehow to be set free. We can go a direction that no church has gone, where there's no salaries, no authority, nothing that's not in the New Testament. And there's no authority in the New Testament either, by the way. All this devotion, submission to the pastor, that is the worst, most seductive, the wickedest scam of all. The New Testament doesn't teach anybody to kowtow and cower to their pastor. In fact, it's incredible to think that one of the reasons it doesn't teach that is because in the New Testament, there are no pastors. Completely and entirely a human invention designed to keep people in their seats. So the prodigal pastor is here to say, if you're a prodigal, you can come away. You can find something you haven't found in years. You've been wasting your life, wasting your time, wasting your money, thinking that you had to do this in order to be okay with God and to feel right about yourself. And it's just a horrible lie. Now, again, if you love your church, there's one church in Phoenix that I love to go to. And the reason I love to go to is because the pastor is just a great teacher. And he's funny. He's a stand-up comic as a sidekick. And it's not about money. It's not about believing anything. You can just go and be encouraged and have fun. So I don't go there looking for God. I go there like going to a good movie. So if you go to church and you really like it, well, it's like going to a good movie. I don't want to miss the movie. Let's go. It's Sunday. And by the way, in a lot of mega churches, it actually is a movie. It's a flat screen. And you're watching a pastor who's in a different location preach through a flat screen. So we love that. We're conditioned to love movies and flat screens. The church knows that. So the big churches that have the money and are smart enough employ flat screens because they know we're conditioned to watch flat screens and we love movies. So if you go to church and you love it, good. It's a good movie and you like the movie. But if you're going to church to find God, you're sadly deceived. And you are a prodigal. Well, join me. I'm a prodigal. Let's return to the Father's house. You can. It's not hard. Once you see it, it becomes immediate. Well, maybe not immediate. It wasn't for me, but it could have been. But once you see it, there's no turning back. This is the Prodigal Pastor. Glad you're with me. Let's do this again next time. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel, Prodigal Pastor. And give a like, ring the bell, do whatever. And I will be here next time. We'll keep this conversation going and return together to the Father's house. See you next time.